And the word of the day yesterday is Webster Dictionary. I got the app. I know. I have a dictionary on my phone. I'm pretty corny. Luddite. A Luddite refers to someone who is opposed to change and especially technological change. And so it's called me a Luddite, but I enjoy the sense of privacy that comes with not owning a smartphone. So with all the technical issues we have, I guess that would make me a Luddite today. So I thought such a timely word of the day. Samira, you want to get us kicked off?
I sure will. Yes. Thank you everyone for joining. Good afternoon and welcome to our ninth live broadcast of Conversation with Calvin, a series presented by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We are happy and thrilled to have you all here. My name is Samira Ziwari. I'm the Small Business Specialist at the OSDBU office. I want to make a few comments before I introduce my boss, who will be introducing today's guest. First of all, you'll notice that if you're not a presenter for this event, both your microphones and cameras are muted. In the interest of time, there will be no question and answer session. However, we still want your feedback. If you have any suggestions about topics you'd like to hear more about, specific questions you'd like to answer in the future session, or individuals you'd like to hear from as a small business, shoot us an email at small.business@edu.gov, and we will be happy to consider the content of this series. Please do keep in mind that all iterations of the series will be interviewed based in the nature. You may submit questions through the chat during the event. We may or may not present them based on timing and flow. Questions not answered today may be answered in a follow-up event. So now that you have a better understanding of how this will run, let's begin. I'd like to introduce you all to my boss, Mr. Calvin Mitchell Jr. He's going to introduce today's guest of honor. So over to you, Calvin.
First and foremost, thank you, Samira, for putting this together. You are always a rock star in putting these together. Today we have Jess Morris, who is the CEO of Pluribus. Did I say that right?
You did. Pluribus
I did.
Digital.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Because I'm always nervous when I try to pronounce words. I sometimes stumble. However, this is an exciting one because a lot of times we talk about different angles of how small businesses start. Um, this is a interesting story that I'm really, really excited about you guys hearing uh, because Jess has an amazing background. She's worked for Medicaid. She's worked for she worked for GAO. She worked for VA. She worked as a special assistant to the director at VA Health Systems. She was actually on the Hill, so we share that together. But you are on the Senate side. I haven't even been on the train on the Senate side. I've only rode the train on the House side. It's funny because the Senate, everybody's like, "Oh, you got to go to the Senate side." I'm just like, "Oh no, they seem so stuffy on the Senate side." But I was only on the House side. But now that I know you, Jess, I probably would have changed my mind. So she actually, so here's what's funny, Jen, and I never told you this before, but she went to the SUNY school system, right? And Cortland is in New York is one of the schools that we played in basketball when I played college basketball. So
Oh, really? Where did you play?
Centenary College. I played basketball, and we
Very
played
cool.
Cortland.
Very cool.
You guys really handed it to us that day, so I'm not gonna
Can't
talk
say
too
that
much.
was me playing.
And she's got a master from George Washington University. But beyond all these accolades, she is doing so much in this space. And she is also spearheading an amazing initiative to make sure that more women-owned small businesses are more prevalent and are getting more contracts in the federal space. She shared something with me that was very fascinating. The women-owned small businesses in a digital service space only represent only 1% of the total dollars going to small businesses. Is that right, Jess?
Correct. Correct.
So it's we got to do better, right? And so she's been spearheading an initiative to with the other women-owned small businesses to really get that initiative set forward, and that's how we got to know each other. We met a while back, and it was just a fascinating story. And I said, "Hey, would you please be a guest on Conversations with Cal?" And she said, "Let me see what it is first before I agree," and which I appreciated. Right, you just can't jump all the way in, right? You want to kind of dip your toes in the water. But I'm so glad that you agreed. Just for those who are new, Conversations with Cal is kind of like two friends sitting together in front of the fireplace, drinking wine, lemonade, whatever you might drink by the fireplace. That's what we're doing here. And I really do feel like I'm in a fireplace today, next to a fireplace, because I'm upstairs in my house. The air's not circulating as much, so if I look a little shinier than normal, it's I'm working hard for this interview. Is that okay?
Turned up my air conditioning for the same reason. It's definitely a summer in Washington, D.C. for sure. Is it still July? Yeah, summer in July in D.C.
Oh my goodness. And we only really have two seasons. It's winter and summer, right? And there's really nothing in between. But look, I think we got kind of get used to it. That's why I shave my hair so I'd never have a bad hair day. And at least that's what I'm going to tell everybody. But anyway, so let's hop right into it. Is there anything that I left out that you wanna say? That I accurately portray your background?
No, you did a great job of it, for sure. I was a Fed for 18 years in both the legislative and the executive branch space. The last 3 years of my time as a Fed, I was a contracting officer, which is why I probably am among friends when I say that I'm a procurement nerd. And I can't say that I know all things related to procurement, but I certainly love this topic and loved how we got to know each other when we talked several months ago, when I was certainly working to find out more about why are certain things in government the way that they are, now that I'm the owner of a woman-owned small business. So
And so and for those who are wondering how the story goes, we're still working together, and we're gonna try to do some things to really to make sure that women-owned small businesses in the digital service space get a better opportunity at some of these federal contracts. So that's where we are now. We're still pushing, and again, stay tuned, and hopefully we're successful in our endeavors. So,
for
Jess,
sure.
I had mentioned before, you're a CEO of your company, and you got there in an unconventional way. So there are probably some micro small businesses, or maybe even government contractors, or sometimes we have people who are currently in other spaces that are interested in starting a business. Can you walk us through real quick how that happened and how you went from the federal space as a contracting officer, working a good job, I'm imagining, to taking on the headache of owning a business?
There's equal headaches on either side. No, I was a proud Fed for, like I said, almost 20 years, and mostly focused on research and data analysis in the Medicaid space. I was very much into the public service mission and loved the life as a federal employee. I think the story that I told you, and the story that is just the most honest, is a few years ago, I was trying to figure out if research in government was where I wanted to stay, but I was also loving the contracting officer side of things. And so it was a little bit of a midlife crisis, if you will. I had moody teenagers at the same time. And I think that the third other factor was my husband was working for a company called Solutions Technology Systems, Inc., STSI. And the CEO at the time said to him, my husband, Ben, I'm looking to step away from the company. You need to think about if this is something you want to do for yourself. Do you want to run this company? And so we just said to each other one time, I'm gonna step out of like the federal space. I think I'm gonna figure out what's next for me if I leave the federal government, and just figure out why these kids are so grumpy. And he said, great, that gives me a chance to figure out where I'm gonna take this company. I mean, I think we all find ourselves like that when we have preteens.
Yeah.
About 10 months into it, my husband, who is, a solutions architect, which in the digital services space really means he's that chief architect for all of the IT solutions that we look at. And he basically said to me, like, look, I'm a very technical person and I know the industry, I know this technology, but I think you should think about running our company because you're a manager, you understand government contracting space, you're a people person. And thank goodness we have super technical people who understand that there are times when they should run companies and there are times when they should be focused on the technical space and know when to say to other people, you're really the person who can run things. And at the time, I was like, that's so different with what I'd done before in the federal space. Are there folks like me? Turns out there's quite a few people who were once feds, once contracting officers, who are very qualified to run companies. And once I really entertained it and thought about what skills it would need from me, it really became very evident that this was a great idea. And so I said yes, and I became the majority owner of the company. And our previous CEO stepped away. My husband is a small part owner, but really focused on the technical side. But I am now the owner of a digital services company with a focus exclusively on public service missions. We build custom software for the federal government. And if there's anything I know, it's government work. And so it's a partnership that was really smart from the get-go, and that was a little under 3 years ago.
So, Jess, we talked a little bit about this, and what was your mindset, right? Like, what made you say, I can do this, right? Because look, as a government employee, it's very comfortable, right? We got security, we have all these things that really keep us that doesn't keep us up at night, right?
Right.
What inside of you what inside of you said, you know what, I'm going to take this leap? What inside of you, because it sounds like you definitely have a good support system, right? And we talked about this all the time on
For sure.
conversations with Cal, the importance of a good support system, right? And I know you have adoring kids that were rooting you on, and saying go super mom, but what happened inside of you? What was going on internally that really helped you to make that leap?
I mean, I was already stepped away from the federal government. I took a good sabbatical, for lack of a better term, to figure out what was next that would use my skills the way I wanted the rest of my career to go. But it was also a couple of other things. There was already a leadership team in place, and I knew some of them. In fact, I worked with the relative of my now amazing VP of Strategic Growth, Brandy Morrison. I already had known her, and I consulted her, and I said, is this really a smart idea? What makes us get in this direction? And, I really bought into their vision to sort of suggest this. It wasn't just, hey, Jess at the dinner table. It was a team effort to think about where the company would go and what strengths did they need in the next CEO. So that person is now my right-hand man. Brandy loved you met Brandy when we talked in
Yeah,
February.
absolutely. Yeah.
I loved the idea of being woman-owned in this space. And so a big part of it is strategic, is if we certify as being a woman-owned small business, we could pursue contracts that limit competition for the company. I think the other thing that really drives it home for me, that really gives me the excitement in my belly, that even on the hardest days make it well worth it when I look back, is yes, it's using my skills. Yes, I've surrounded myself, become my own boss, surrounded myself with an amazing team, but it's also the joy and the independence you don't have as a Fed
Mm,
to develop a brand in my own vision. And
right.
so we renamed our company. We're no longer STSI, we're Pluribus Digital. And Pluribus, as you know, comes from E Pluribus Unum, which is on all American money. And it really means united, we are one. And I wanted to create a brand that represents that public service mission as soon as you hear it, that public knowledge, but also the inclusivity. And so I was able to really promote our brand as a new, even though we'd been around for 23 years, but to show that we were going in a new direction, and the ability to say, these are the principles that we stand for as a small business. If you look at our website, we list our principles and how they inform our decisions. That is so empowering, to be unapologetically inclusive, to be unapologetically talking about the type of company I want to run. I want to run a calm culture. I don't want folks burn out with 60-hour weeks, but I want to make sure that they hear that that's doable. I want to reinvest in communities that are underserved in technology, women, our neighborhoods. Those are things you can't do as a federal employee. And so to have the autonomy and having no one else to answer to but myself, and the guidance of the smart people I've surrounded by, is something you don't have as a Fed. And so that has been super empowering.
And I really like something on your website. Pluribus represents both the many we serve and the many diverse skills and backgrounds brought together to provide those services. And when you look at your leadership team, is pretty diverse. And I really appreciate that you walk the walk and talk the talk. And that's been a big part of your success, right? You've seen significant growth in the company in the short time that you've been there. But I want to talk a little bit about something. I want to pull a string on something because I don't want to run past it. How many women-owned small businesses are in this technology space?
So it's funny because we define woman-owned small businesses in this space. I think we are up this perceived that we don't exist. The SBA actually publishes this data quite publicly, and we make up easily a third, if not more. I'd have to go back at the exact numbers. Easily a third, if not more, of all small businesses. But of course, we're half the population. If you look at just the digital services numbers alone, we are pulling together a list so that you can say, I want to know how many woman-owned small businesses exist in the digital services space and are on a specific vehicle. And so I think the SBA is in the process of getting better at being transparent about those numbers, but there's definitely a disconnect. I think an interesting factor to compare all that to is in just the federal technology space alone. So just speaking about technologists in the civic and federal space, we make up 25%. But we started the call talking about how we get less than 1% of digital services contracts. Wow. And so not to jump into what we were talking about in February, but I think the initiative that we're trying to do is face some of the challenges that our misconceptions that women-owned small businesses have in the procurement space. I've talked to OSDBUs like yourself, and I've talked to procurement officers, and I said, would you be willing to set this aside? I know of quite a few women-owned small businesses that would like the opportunity to compete against this proposal. In fact, the Biden administration set out I think most folks on this call probably know, but it bears repeating, that they sent out an executive order that said that they're very focused this year, especially in increasing equity for underserved small business owners. Women are roughly 20%, like I said, 20 to 25%, maybe even a third of all small businesses. But, overall, outside of digital services, it's still not a good story. Less than 5% of federal contracts go to women-owned small businesses. I don't want to make it even worse, but I'm going to tell you, just yesterday, maybe a couple of days ago, the SBA released its first report card. The new goal from the Biden administration is we should be getting, women-owned small businesses should be getting 5% of federal contracts. The number of women-owned small businesses, not just awarded work, but the number of women-owned small businesses is declining. Even though we exist in large numbers, it's sliding. They're not engaging for some reason. And federal government procurement awards are sliding. It's the lowest it's been in 5 years. They're not meeting their 5% target. It's the lowest at 4.63%. The last time it was higher than that was 2017. And so it's the awards are not going in the direction it was intended to. And quite honestly, Cal, when we talked back in February, one of the things I was saying to you is, why are we not seeing these set-asides? We exist in droves. And I think we were hearing a couple of challenges. And you and I, and this is stealing from your thoughts, right? You were saying that it's not always clear that we exist in numbers. To your point, how many of them are you?
Right.
The numbers are very public. We are definitely out there.
Right.
But women-owned small business procurement has to meet a different rule. You have to do market research as a federal procurement officer, right? You have to show that there's a market of women-owned small businesses in that NAICS code, right? So if that NAICS code is the digital services NAICS codes, the procurement officer has to know to do that research. I don't know that there's always that knowledge in the federal procurement space that that's available to them.
Yeah.
And, you know, we would love to see more set asides. I think sometimes there's also the challenge as to whether or not, so we may say there's 25% of us of all small businesses are women owned. I think we also face the challenges of, are we actually women owned and women led, right? Are we running our companies?
Yeah.
Which I understand that perception, but I'm here to tell you that there's droves of us who are running their companies. I don't think most people wonder if veterans are running their companies, and that's fair. I wouldn't question that either. But the recertification process, the certification as a woman-owned small business is a big factor. And so we're here to tell you that there's quite a few of us, and we're compiling a very specific list of women-owned, women-led digital services firms ready to do the work for the government.
I love it. I love it. And going back to what you said, so you know, it's interesting because Executive Order 13985 has said that underserved small businesses will have a special, I'm going to say layman's term, a special place, right? And that we as a government have to put action plans in place. And that every agency has to have an action plan on how we're going to reduce barriers for small business, right? This is one of the ways we try to reduce barriers, right? Just knowledge, understanding the programs. I wanted to take some time for us to discuss this. One, because I love the initiative, and two, I think there are probably some other women-owned small businesses that are in the digital space. I can think of several who would probably want to sign up in the Army, right? Who want to sign up and be a part of this, because there's so many great small business, women-owned small businesses, and that they're definitely underrepresented, especially in the digital services space. So I definitely wanted to talk a little bit about that. And on top of that, so if you're out there and you're looking at an agency, if you Google whatever agency you're looking for, an equity plan, or if you do White House equity plan, all the equity plans will show up, and you'll see how each agency is trying to engage to try to reduce barriers for small business. And it goes without saying that M2203 talks about how they can increase the small disadvantaged business and overall small business for all our underserved communities. So hopefully we can change those numbers, because I think it's pretty clear that a lot of women-owned small businesses are underrepresented in a lot of our procurements. So what are some challenges that you didn't anticipate on being on the other side in doing business with the federal government? What are some challenges that you discovered?
Well, so when I came in as CEO, you know, we talked about how I thought this was ultimately a great idea. I liked going in this direction. The story I like to tell, there are unquestionable small business challenges, but I came in, we made the announcement that I was going to be the new CEO on March 13th, 2020. And that was the day when pretty much every federal office closed down because of COVID. Right. It's also the day I got a text message that my son's school was going to close for what turned out to be more than a year. My two first executive actions as a CEO was to cancel the lease space that we were required by contract to open up for a brand new $95 million contract that was going to house 100 people. But of course, we had to stop that lease. We didn't ultimately and thankfully sign that lease. And we had to pull all of our folks out of federal spaces and say to all of our federal leaders, listen, we're going to pull our staff out. It does not appear to be safe. That was definitely not something I had anticipated even a month before we announced me coming in as CEO. And so it's definitely been a wild ride to be a CEO almost exclusively virtually. I didn't meet most of my staff in the first 2 years because everybody was waiting for vaccines and ultimately finding that pathway to feeling comfortable to being back again. And so, interestingly, the rest of the last 2 years has been full of several things. Whereas, as CEO, you don't anticipate things like the Black Lives Matter movement. And what are you going to say about that? And I think it's really important. I talked about how the principles of our company, I want to unapologetically feel autonomous to say what I need to, but how does that role matter as CEO? And what is my corporate responsibility? As a Fed, you don't really ask yourself about corporate responsibility. You sort of hear what the administration says. And so, yes, there are definitely the challenges of setting rates for a contract and making sure that we're recruiting, equitably, and that we're looking at in a market that is very difficult for recruiting, the creative ways. But I think as a CEO and as a former Fed, that's something that I've had an amazing team that counsels me and gives me thoughts and lets me bounce off ideas. But those are not something that you're prepared for when you're a Fed. And it's something that I think is very important that we do as corporate leaders.
Yeah, I know. I had a friend who always would explain life as weightlifting. We both used to like going to the gym a lot. Believe it or not, I still go to the gym. And he would always say, Calvin, your muscles only grow when they're sore, right? Like if you go and you work out and you don't have sore muscles, usually you're probably not growing. So through that pain and some of that adversity, we grow when we really come into form. Sometimes we become something that we don't even recognize, right? Because we've grown just that much. But pulling on that string a little bit, let's talk a little bit, because you told me like you grew right during the pandemic, right? You
Tremendous.
experienced tremendous growth during the pandemic. What are some things that you could say were success for you, and how you were able to grow during the pandemic?
So a big part of where we're looking to grow is my background being in healthcare. We're growing out and pursuing contracts at CMS and HHS. That's an area that we have actually not materialized growth, and part of being a small business owner that we're feeling excited about is to leverage my background and our company's strong capabilities in software development and bidding on work. I think when we talked at one point, you were asking to me, not only where was I successful, but where were we unsuccessful?
Right.
We bid on our first healthcare CMS contract, and we didn't get a down select yet. And that's okay. That's a big part of where we're trying to gain experience. Past performance plays a role in a lot of these bids, but we are definitely ready to do impactful work. We're definitely interested in really pursuing work in the healthcare space that has a direct impact on Medicaid beneficiaries, Medicare beneficiaries. So while you asked me, the question was, where have I been successful? In a lot of ways, it's just growing the team, growing the leadership team and the company in the direction we wanted to go to. Most incoming CEOs in our digital services space are starting their company from scratch. I came in when the company was 23 years old. And I had a company that has a solid legacy, a solid foundation at agencies like FDIC, where we've done great work and we have a great team. And I'm proud to say we have employees that tenure 10, 15, 18 years, where we've been very successful. And we want to continue that. A big part of owning it and renaming it as Pluribus is saying, but we're also going on these new green fields. And
Right.
so I think a lot of those successes have been at USCIS. So we have a $95 million prime contract at USCIS where we do biometrics DevSecOps work. We're growing at GSA. We're on a GSA total contract as a sub with another digital services coalition firm. And so we're making exciting new inroads on the areas that we're really focused on, which is mostly Homeland Security, specifically USCIS within Homeland Security, and in the healthcare space.
So two things that I want to follow up on. I always say that the unsuccessful aspects of the career help us to understand and appreciate the successful aspects of our career, right? So all those things, like, so you didn't get the bid, right? What happened afterwards, right? How did you regroup, and how did you say, hey, what can we do better? I always say, and I always preach to small businesses that, hey, make sure you get a debrief, right?
Yeah.
And if it's on GSA schedule, they may say to you, hey, you know what? FAR Part 8 says I don't have to do a full-blown debrief, right? But they do have to provide you with feedback. So don't go away and say, oh, they can't do anything. You can at least get some feedback, because Jess, you'll probably agree that with each debriefing, with each feedback, with each proposal, your proposals get stronger and stronger. Would you agree?
For sure, for sure. And I think a big part of starting a whole new greenfield of strategic growth, healthcare being something we have not historically been in. You know, we've been successful in that we started new work at the VA, we've started new work within GSA's contract at CDC. So while we've had these small inroads, I think it's about relationships. It's about, that's one of the fun parts of being a small business owner, is knowing other small business owners. And they come from all walks of life. So quite honestly, some of the lessons learned is knowing who the players are, both within the agency. This is kind of a no-brainer, right? Knowing within the agency who the program offices are, but also understanding where the agency is going. Are they interested in digital services transformation is a big question folks in my industry ask. And some agencies are at different stages of that. We're more than happy to be, and we're humble to be what we call the honest broker, where we can come in and say, you're interested in getting to point A, you're already at a different point, and how can we help you get there? So it's knowing the agency's needs, knowing the agency's intended pathway and what's possible. But it's also just simply pounding the pavement, right? Getting to know, and during COVID, pounding the pavement often includes Zoom calls and knowing how to navigate Zoom. I'm pleased to see that some of the in-person interactions are happening now, attending conferences,
Yeah.
happy hours. It's the same old stuff. But
Yeah.
COVID just changed the rules. It was unique in that my first 2 years, there really were no happy hours. So I would say maybe the first 18 months. That's both a blessing and a curse, because I was drinking from my fire hose without happy hours. And so it kind of gave me the ability to catch up in this industry, but it also, gave us some handcuffs where we couldn't interact with our employees. We couldn't meet the teaming partners over dinner. We couldn't go to an agency where we already had work and, walk around the halls and see how the folks are doing on site. So some of those differences from COVID really changed the rules.
Jess, I want to follow up on something you said. So, oftentimes, the hardest part in federal contracting is where to start, right? Being from GAO, there's a gazillion agencies in the federal government, right?
Yes.
And it is amazing because it's daunting when you think of all the different agencies that exist, right? And even small agency council, you can look that up, and there's tons of small agencies that are there. You talked about a new strategic path and looking at healthcare and looking at this sector. Can you explain to our audience what made you go in that direction, and how you got buy-in, and what made you identify that as a new market, as a new target market, if you will?
For sure, for sure. I would also add to that sort of a strategic pathway is also GWACs, government-wide acquisitions. So we've grown our strategy to include healthcare, and why? It's really a couple of simple factors. CMS, HHS is actually one of the more woman-owned small business friendly spaces. But it doesn't matter unless you're truly on a GWAC, right? You have to be on the right vehicles to get into an agency. And so you may know folks, you may even know teaming partners with past performance there, but you've got to spend the time not just growing your practice, growing your healthcare strategy, but deciding how to get on the right vehicles and what agencies are using which vehicles. We are we were on-ramped onto CIO SP3 small business. We bid on that before we were certified as a woman-owned small business. We've seen USCIS use that vehicle. We've heard other agencies using that vehicle, but it's kind of using its time as we anticipate whether CIO SP4 will see the light of day, which is a subject in and of itself. But it's all about knowing where those vehicles are, what agencies folks are using, and there's a lot of ways to find out, and you've really just got to put the time and the effort into it. So it's really knowing what they're friendly to your set aside to limit your competition, and in our case, it's the woman-owned small business angle. It's the vehicles to be on and to limit your competition and exclude them by seeing the work that's going to be on those. And I would honestly say it's also in my industry, it's the agencies that are interested in spending money on digital services, agile transformation, which is not something all agencies are ready for. We're excited to see that it's snowballing. We're seeing more agency-wide BPAs in digital services. Another GWAC that's out right now is called Polaris, which I'm pleased to say has a pool dedicated to women-owned small businesses.
Interesting.
I have to say, in case there's anybody listening in this space, I think we're seeing a trend between SP4 and Polaris for scorecards that I'm not a big fan of, I'll be honest with you, but nonetheless, we have to overcome that. We have to sort of rate ourselves and the requirements of that scorecard to be competitive. Otherwise, we can't win work in that space.
Yeah, so just recapping, it's important to do your market research, right? Identifying who's spending what, and once you define who that client is that's spending what you're selling, or who's buying what you're selling, you also got to determine the contract vehicle. That is a huge part that is often missed. And I always say to my small businesses, look, if I get you in front of a customer and you get them fired up and ready to go, but they don't have a vehicle or a mechanism to get to you, when it goes to contracting, it's probably going to die in the vine. Why?
Yeah.
Because contracting is not going to know what to do. They weren't in those discussions, right? And so unless there's a perfect pathway, we work on the pathway by knowing the contract vehicles and knowing the rules and how to get around, and not how to get around, but how to navigate those vehicles so that you can have a competitive advantage. That is the way to go, right? Because that really opens up the aperture for you to really solidify the opportunity and really get some traction.
And competition is good, so don't get me wrong there. As a former contracting officer, I totally understand that competition is good. I'm a huge believer in the process and how it yields good value to the government. But what's interesting that we haven't talked about is there is an easy button in procurement, right? And it's a good easy button. The 8A program was created a sole source authority so that you could award as procurement officers contracts directly to 8A companies. And we do have an 8A joint venture with an amazing design firm. And so that is something that we have strategically decided was necessary to compete. But the woman-owned small business or any other socioeconomic status program, Hub Zone, veteran-owned small business, they don't have that sole source authority without, and this is what I talked about back in February, without the rule of two. Procurement officers have to do the research to prove that there is at least two companies in this space to do the work. And I don't know if we're going to see the legislative authority or the executive authority that would give women-owned small businesses the ability to get a sole source. It's available to procurement officers, but the bar is much, much higher for those non-8A socioeconomic categories. And so the next best thing is to show that we exist, to show that there's tons of us. And that's where we started part of the conversation is, so then let's do the market research. Let's show the folks that are interested in digital services that there are droves of us that are women-owned, women-led companies available to do this work.
And I really like what you said. And something else that I was gonna piggyback on is FAR Part 6305 really outlines the exceptions to competition. One of them is women-owned small business, right? And you and I know, right, being on the Hill, there's a lot of great intent, right? But sometimes the great intent doesn't always manifest itself in the way it should be. The only advice that I would give to those who are women-owned small businesses that may be in the digital space, that are maybe looking to use that authority, is you have to nail. If you want to write it down, it's FAR Part 302, FAR Part 6302-1, which is only one responsible, right? So you have to identify how you are really the only one that has this technology, right? Now, really, you don't need to be a woman-owned small business to really tie into that. But when you're thinking about how you're going to position yourself and how you might be able to even leverage it, that's one way to do it. But I want to go back to this idea of the government-wide contracts and really determining what the market looks like, right? It's essentially what you're saying. What are some decisions that you guys make internally in terms of growing, right? And how do you say, hey, I'm going to pursue this opportunity or not pursue this opportunity? Can you walk through that process?
The process of deciding if we're going to pursue an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a pretty specific prescriptive process where we, of course, we look on the vehicles that we have access to. We look at the forecasts, if they're reliable and predictable, and agencies vary in how reliable and predictable those forecasts are. And then, of course, whatever comes out in various forums, we review them and we look for a variety of things like timeliness. Can we pursue phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 as they come in the time frame that we have? We're a small business. You can see on our website we have a growth team that we've, in my tenure, we've grown to focus on ways to pursue growth for the company. And so that team will decide technical fit. Is this the capabilities of our company? And being fairly pure in our approach to that. We don't want to stretch our company or our brand in a way that we're not. We do custom digital service, custom DevSecOps, but definitely digital services work. And we're not generally interested in going outside of that. And so if there's part of the scope of a work that does go outside of that, we think, well, who else is in this space that we'd want to team with? Teaming is a big part of it. Is it a small business that we would be teaming with? Does it require us to work with a large, which in general can be a big question. Do we want to work with a large in this space? My preference is to work with other smalls on just principles alone. And then it's really just a matter of, do we have any insight into the client? Does the client even know we exist? Do we have any past performance at this agency? And those decisions right there are the first major parts of whether we even consider pursuing it. And that's when we start making phone calls. We call all of our teaming partners. Are you looking at this? What do you know about the incumbent? Who's gonna be looking at this as well? Should we team up, or are they our competitor? These are all questions that all small businesses and larges ask themselves when things drop and you're wondering, is this for us? Do we have the time? Do we have the bandwidth? Or maybe we've been working and waiting for it to drop and we thought, we heard, we responded to an RFI 6 to 8 months ago. So there's a lot of factors.
So what I really like, there's a foot stomp that's in there that I want to flesh out. Teaming, partnering is not a bad thing, right? A lot of times we say, oh, well, so-and-so is my competitor. That could be true, right? But to me, it sounds like a lot of the companies like yours that have been really successful in their growth strategy, they've identified partners, right? They've identified who they can work with on certain requirements to really strengthen their proposals and strengthen their capabilities. Could you talk a little bit about that a little?
Sure, absolutely. A big part of being a small business in the digital services space that we found is that there's a variety of principles that people have when they approach approach work. Our company is actually one of the founding members of what you call the Digital Services Coalition, which is a coalition of generally small to medium-sized firms that operate in the digital services space. And the principle is exactly as you described it, is that there's some cooperative competition going on there. Certainly not collusion. I don't think that that would ever be the case. But I think it's definitely, we have shared concerns on recruiting. We have shared interest on understanding the FAR. We have shared interest in understanding all the different ways that you're going to come at government procurement. And teaming is a huge part of that. And small businesses are stronger when they blend their capabilities and build on each other and stand on each other's shoulders to put a proposal together that helps us all grow. Maybe we've got experience at an agency, or maybe we're the strongest based on how the scope of work is written on the one task that really needs Pluribus digital skills. And so it's really a combination of factors. I would say what I also consider is some of that cultural alignment. Are they someone I want to work with every day? So there's the proposal process. Right. And those are not often the same people that you deliver with. And so I do think there's a little bit of a dance when you're talking about teaming that goes way beyond your capability statement and has more to do with, are they a good cultural fit? Do we want to work with them for the next 5 years?
That's fantastic. And I think, and I really wanted to pull the string on that, because a lot of times, a lot of small businesses, I get the sense that they're not comfortable with the teaming, right? And I think sometimes they even get disappointed when I say, hey, look at our active contractor list. Look who's there. Look who's doing work. If you can't reach out and can't get a contact, reach out to me and let me see if I can try to help you, right? And I think they're a little discouraged because it sounds like, and what they're hearing is, well, Calvin's not trying to get me in a prime arrangement. And that's not totally the case. I think that federal acquisitions is an ecosystem, right? I need large businesses to help me to meet my small business goals, right? And when people hear me say that, they're like, what are you talking about? The large businesses want to work with small businesses, right? But they don't want to just work with any random small business. And if you've ever engaged them, they're going to say, well, are you going to bring me an opportunity? Or what are you bringing to the table, right? So I always say that it's really important to recognize this whole ecosystem, and me having relationships with the large, just as if I have relationships with the micro small business, because all of them are going to be able to help me to meet my goals and my objectives, because I got subcontracting and I got prime. So being able to know what that ecosystem is, being able to understand what the partnerships can bring and how the value can bring, is fantastic. And I know that SBA has a rule coming up where you can use the past performance as a first tier sub, which is huge, right? Because that's huge, right? Like we talk about barriers for small business, right? That's a huge barrier, right? It's
a huge barrier. Yeah. Right? If I'm trying to get into an agency I've never been at before, and we can all agree that good fresh blood is a good thing from time to time. Absolutely. If I'm doing the exact same thing at a different agency and it's got all the parallels, let me tell you that story and make sure I can show you how I can do it for your agency. For sure. And it's interesting because you talked about ways in which you're looking at it. I think what we're finding is that it's more than the standard prime sub relationship out there. And I'm always encouraged when I see agencies, procurement officers that are open to different types of teaming arrangements. We're on a contract at USCIS where there's a 4-member contractors teaming arrangement, a CTA. Wow. And they have equal privity of contract.
Teaming arrangement.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that is unique to GSA, but it doesn't have to be. It's a nice way to sort of bring multiple smalls together to bring the strength and the breadth of 4 companies. That's 4 companies recruiting for you. That's 4 companies with technical knowledge that work together. And it's a badgeless environment. We work in one space to be one seamless customer for our client. And it's been a very huge success. Joint ventures are another example, which I think people are more familiar. And those are just different ways that we'd love to see more creativity and leveraging small business strength.
Yeah, and that creativity is part of the challenge of the government, right? And you know the inside baseball. And quite frankly, I'm going to say this on a recorded line that I don't think the government really promotes you to want to be innovative, right? And a lot of times, why do I say that? Because Jess Morris, she used to work for an agency named Government Accountability Office, which 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 would come and look at everything you did and said, "Oh, why did you do this?" And if I said, "Oh, I was trying to be innovative," they'd be like, "That's a finding."
Finding for sure. The GAO published all about women-owned small businesses back in 2019, so they know all about this and how there's a lot of work to be done. I would promote the DITAP program, which is a training program for federal procurement officers in the digital services space, so that you can understand ways in which you can procure digital services work and how you can understand the methodology associated with. It doesn't even have to use the word innovative and creative. It's the status quo now. It's moving in a direction that will allow government to really meet its citizens' needs. And, we're doing exciting things from Operation Allies Welcome, where, Afghan refugees are coming overnight and they're able to access government systems. We're helping, if banks foreclose and the FDIC has to serve its purposes, we're helping federal employees that serve that process have access to very critical banking information so that they can serve the mission of the government. And that's what gets me excited every day. That's
Yeah.
exciting stuff. And to be surrounded by talent that are just as motivated to do that.
Well, and what makes me excited is hearing the opportunities that small businesses are having and the impact that you guys are having in the communities, in our economy, right?
Yes.
With look, who's gonna get us out of the financial pinch we might be in, right? Is our small business. You guys are the economic engine of the economy. You're the lifeblood, right? Without small businesses, our economy would not only not thrive, would probably die in a lot of ways, right? Because there are more opportunities that we find through small business. So if nothing else, I want to encourage our small businesses to keep on keeping on, because I know federal contracting can be very difficult, but there's also very rewarding, right? And Jess, I think you would agree that there's been a lot of rewards, even though there's a lot of challenges. And the only reason we're highlighting the challenges is because we want to have a realistic view of what the landscape looks like. So that way, when you encounter a challenge, a stumbling block, a hurdle, you won't say, "Why is this happening to me? Why is this so hard?" Everybody in this ecosystem has probably encountered the same challenge. And Jess is a prime example, that these barriers, these speed bumps, these hurdles will not prevent you from success. The only thing that can prevent you from success is you, right? And if you're not able to push through and have that determination, you won't be able to get there. So,
For
thank
sure.
thank
Can
you.
I do a shameless plug for the Digital Services
Please,
Network then?
please,
So
shameless
if
plug
you're
away.
listening to this today and you're a woman-owned, women-led digital services firm, find me on LinkedIn, Jessica Morris at Pluribus Digital, or Brandy Morrison at Pluribus Digital. We're very interested in making sure we have a complete quality list of digital services firms that are women-led, so that we can tell the government this great list that we have and build out this network and do good work as women-owned small businesses and see where it takes us.
Yeah, and as I said, you got my support, and
Thank you.
we're gonna continue to push this forward, because I think it's important, right? Because one day my daughter Phoebe start her digital service business, right?
That's
Uh,
right. That's
and
right. My
and
daughter's my
so
successor. I'm sure of it.
right, and so
They're going to take over the
you're
world.
trailblazing for the next generation, right? So, I think it's
With
important for us to really embrace these opportunities.
and kudos to you for being an ally to this mission and understanding the needs of small businesses and being a big part of helping us share the voice of what's the day-to-day of a former Fed that's now running a company. So thank you for the opportunity.
So, before I let you go, and before I turn
Yes.
it over to Samira, I want to leave with this. If there's a small business that needs a word of encouragement, I know we didn't practice this, but there's a small business that needs a word of encouragement, what would you tell them?
It's a great question. I would say surround yourself with people that you trust. Surround yourself and, check your ego and make sure that you understand that you've always got something to learn. If I didn't take that advice from myself, I would have been drowning. I need to make sure that I listen to the people who have, great counsel, and in the end, you become grateful of the smart people who may often be smarter than me. The title of CEO is just the title, and I'm really the culmination of the great people, my leadership team, the talent that work for Pluribus Digital and meet that mission. So listening to them and leading in their vision is definitely the best way. It's worked for me.
And it'll work for you too. And thank you, Jess. Again, you have been awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome one to interview. Your story is so fascinating. I know I find you totally inspiring, not only because you're a fantastic mother and wife, but you're also really, really cool business lady. So
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate that. And I told her, I said, you just exude boss, right? Like every time I speak to you, I'm like, okay, I gotta listen. She's a boss, right? And I
I love it.
really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you being very, very vulnerable with our audience today, and allowing them to really learn from your highs and your lows, and just hearing your story.
I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
All right, Samira, can you close us out?
Yes, thank you, Jess and Calvin, for this great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you,
guys.
Samira.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Calvin.
See ya.